Hello everybody, it's Julia here from the Highly Sensitive Tarot, and today I'm here to do a little spooky sort of Halloween true stories video. This is part 2. Last year around about this time I did one of these videos, and it was a VR to Carrie at Tiara Princess of Wands. She'd done a video talking about some sort of ghostly and spirit type activities she'd had going on, and then I did a VR, and I really loved doing it actually. I did it by candlelight, and it felt quite spooky to do, so I really enjoyed it, and I've posted that video in my community pages, so you can find that, and I'll also put a link to that video and Carrie's video in my description box so that you can see the other stories, because I think probably most of the other stories were the most ghostly and strange and weird and spooky tales that I've got, but I've got 5 here that I've written down today that I'm gonna tell you about, so I hope that you enjoy it. And if you've got any stories of your own, I would love to hear. I love to hear people's true stories, anything spooky or strange or mysterious. That would be fab. So without further ado, I think, I've got 5 stories here that I hope to tell you. So the first one it goes right back to my childhood, maybe when I was 4 or 5, maybe younger, maybe a little bit older, I'm not sure. But I was always scared of the dark, and I always used to think there was something under my bed, or something in my wardrobe, or something behind my curtains. And I used to surround myself in bed with teddies and dolls. They used to be like a wall, like a boundary around me, and I used to surround myself with them. But what I thought when I was younger was dreaming, or I think I've convinced myself actually over the years that I was perhaps dreaming, but I'm not so sure that I was, because I was seeing somebody behind my curtains, and I would see a woman dressed in a long pale blue gown, and she had very, very pale blonde, even maybe white long hair, and there used to be like this really bright light around her when she used to appear in my bedroom at night, and I could see her through my curtains because the light was so bright behind her. And she used to put her hand out to beckon me and to tell me to come, and she used to say, Julia, Julia, come here. And she used to say that over and over, come here, come here. And I used to lay there in my bed, surrounded by all my teddies and dolls, just like peeking and not daring to move and not daring to make a sound. And I was definitely not going to get up out of bed and go. I think even in my little head then, I thought it was a trick. But I'm not so sure anymore, because whoever this lady was or is, I've seen her since. Not very often, but whenever I meditate or I ask for my spirit guide to come to me and show themselves to me, to give me a sign, in my mind I always see this blonde, golden haired woman wearing a pale blue dress, and she's always smiling and she's always saying, come here. So I don't know who she is. She doesn't scare me anymore, but she certainly did when I was little. So there's that one. That's number 1. Number 2 is when I was about 20 maybe, I'd gone off backpacking with my boyfriend at the time, and we'd been backpacking across Spain and France, and we ended up in Corsica. And at the time that we ended up in Corsica, we had run out of money because we'd been working in Spain and things like that to fund our travels. And when we got to Corsica, we'd run out of money, so we were camping in the woods. We just pitched our tent in the woods, and we were quite a long way into the woods, maybe a mile. It took us 10 or 15 minutes to walk to where we were. There was no buildings around us. It was just woodland. There was nothing around us at all. We were maybe a mile away from the beach, and from anybody else really. We were really, roughing it out in the woods. And as we did most nights, as it started to get dark, we'd get in our tent, and we had a little tea light lantern, and we'd play cards in our tent at night time. And we were playing cards one evening. It was dark outside, and all of a sudden we could hear like hooves, like the thundering of hooves on the ground, like horses, because it wasn't just one, it was loud, and it was like we could almost feel the vibrations of it through the earth. And it was like either a lot of horses galloping all at once, or a herd of cows or something. But it was like something was coming towards us, and we could hear the thud on the ground of these hooves. And both of us, excuse me, me and Robert, just were like, and I was like, Robert, go and look, go and see. I wasn't moving. I was just rigid with fear, because it was like I could feel the sensations, the vibrations in my body of what was coming towards us. It sounded like horses at full gallop, or a herd of cows that had just bolted, and Robert wouldn't move either. And so both of us were just sat there staring at each other, rigid in our sleeping bags, thinking, on the one hand, thinking we were going to be trampled to death any minute, and on the other hand, our sort of more logical brain saying, but you're in the middle of the woods, there's no cows, there's no horses, there's no people, there's no buildings, there's no vehicles, there's no roads, there's nothing. And so we just sort of sat there, with our eyes like, just frozen, I think, in confusion and terror. And the noise got louder and louder, like it was coming closer and closer. And all of a sudden, it was like something went through us and through the tent and out the other side and carried on. And at that moment, Robert seemed to break out of his spell of being frozen, and he shot out the front of the tent to look, and there was nothing there. There was nothing there at all. We were just in the middle of woodland. And so we as you can imagine, we both got back in the tent and were like, oh my God, what was that? And then we were like, was there something in the sky? Were we feeling the vibrations of something, an aircraft? Was there something under the ground that went under us? Or were we really in the path of some ghostly herd of horses or cows or something? I don't know, but they were running fast. It was like at full gallop. I mean, it was, oh my God. I can still feel that one because I was terrified. So there's that one. That's number 2. Number 3 is not a ghostly one. Number 3 is a UFO story. And I've believed in, UFOs. I believe in UFOs. I believe that we are, I believe that there are other dimensions, I think is what I believe. And I think that other races of people or beings come and go from our world all the time, and I think always have done. And I think that there are unidentified things in our sky and all over the place all the time. I've talked to so many people and read so many things. It's just, in my mind, it's just undeniable. And like I said, I think that there are different dimensions and things can come and go, And I had never seen anything, all my life, despite my beliefs and always looking up in the sky. And then about 10 years ago, where I was living, our house was quite high up, sort of above a valley and above part of the city. So we had an absolutely marvellous view, a fantastic view out of our bedroom window, which was upstairs. And we had a massive window, an absolutely massive window. And one of our favourite things to do was to stand up there and just to watch the sky. We were fascinated with the stars and the movement of the moon, and we were just fascinated with all sorts of things and never really expected to see anything else. And one night I was just gazing out at this massive sky, and there was quite a bright star that was sort of twinkling and flashing a little bit, and I kept finding my eye being drawn back to it, of just sort of like, I'm sure I've not seen that there before, and thinking, was it a planet? What was it? It was just odd. And all of a sudden, this, what I thought was a planet or a big star, just suddenly shot off in an impossible direction, at an impossible angle, at an impossible speed. And it just shot off in the air and then turned on a dime, turned in a split second and shot off the other way. And it kept doing that. It was like flitting across the sky in all sorts of impossible speeds and angles. And then I noticed there were another 2 of these things. And I stood watching them for ages. And I kind of, if that had been now, I would have had my phone out and I'd have been trying to record those on my phone for sure, if I'd had the presence of mind. But at the time, like I said, I think it was 10, 11 years ago. And although I had a mobile phone, I don't think it had any kind of camera that I could have actually captured any of this on. And I just stood watching them for like maybe 5 or 10 minutes and was calling for my other half to come look. I can't, actually, that might be a lie. He might have been there with me, but I feel I was watching them on my own. I'm not sure. But all of a sudden, because these crafts, whatever these were in the sky, they made no sound while they were flitting about in the sky. They made absolutely no sound whatsoever. And then all of a sudden I heard the sound of quite loud aircraft, and 2 fighter jets came into view. They sort of came in across that way, and they chased or they followed, I don't know whether they chased or they followed these UFOs, and they disappeared out of my view and I couldn't see them anymore. But this must have been 10 or 15 minutes of this all going on in the sky, and it was amazing. Still to this day, I wish I'd got it on camera. It's the sort of thing that, you know, you see in people's videos on Mr. MBB 333, whatever his name is. But, you know, people send those type of videos in, and I'm always like, but yeah, I saw that maybe 10 or 12 years ago. So, and I keep looking, you know, I keep looking. I'm always looking at the sky. I like to follow the movement of the planets and stars and the moon. So I'm always looking, and I've not seen anything like that since. So that's number 3. So number 4 is, this is just a little one really. Number 5 is my last story, and I really hope that with that one I'll be clever enough to manage to insert some photos at the end of this video. But anyway, number 4 is another house I was living at maybe 10-12 years ago. I'd never really, I mean, most of the places I've lived, to be honest, over the years, I've felt a presence at times. I've seen things, I've felt things. But this particular house, not a lot really. It was a brand new house that I'd moved into. It was, you know, freshly built, and it felt quite neutral. You know, I hadn't felt a great deal there really. And but this one day I was cooking in the kitchen. My other half was in the kitchen with me. He was sort of off to the side of me, I suppose. I had my back to the room while I was cooking. And while I was cooking, I kept sort of thinking there was somebody behind me, or there was something behind me. And I was sort of, I could see my other half out of the corner of my eye across the room, and I knew it wasn't him. And I was pretty sure, you know, my son wasn't in the room, but I just sort of kept having this feeling that somebody was behind me. And then I felt it really strongly, and almost even as if something touched my hair behind me. And I sort of turned like that to look and didn't see anything. And as I turned to look, I saw my other half's face, and he was like, and I said, what? Was there I said, well, was there something behind me? And he said, there was an old lady behind you. And he said she was tiny, but she was almost up to your head, and she was reaching out for you. But he said her feet weren't touching the ground. It was like she was hovering, and she was wearing a long black dress. And he said she was there and then gone, there and then gone, there and then gone, like she was blinking in and blinking out. And I felt her. I couldn't see her, but I felt her. And my ex saw her. And that was it. I mean, that's literally my little story with that one. I never saw or felt her again. My ex never saw or felt her again. It was just in that moment. But what a peculiar thing. So, number 5, this is my last story. Number 5, this was, I was maybe age 27, 28, so, you know, quite a long time ago. I'm 55 now. And this was when I was working as a nurse. And the hospital that I was working at was called St Andrew's Hospital. And it was I think it was the first lunatic asylum to be built in the UK. I think it was built and opened around 1812, 1814, something like that. And I think the hospital over the years had been a place of, you know, some very tormented souls. You know, not a lot of people that were put in those asylums in the early days were truly mad. A lot of them were, you know, were destitute, unmarried mothers, just, you know, all sorts of unfortunate people really, and all sorts of awful therapies, so-called therapies, went on in that hospital. They used to do insulin therapy where they'd put people in like a diabetic coma. There was ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, in the days before they'd actually sedate people to do that. I think they may have even practiced lobotomies in that hospital because they were very popular at one time. And I think all of that went on really until perhaps the 50s or 60s, when certain medications were discovered, you know, like chlorpromazine, which became a chemical kosh for people, you know. People just turned into these, on the whole, sort of well-behaved but zombified people on a lot of these awful drugs. So St Andrew's Hospital had had a long and probably quite sad and unpleasant history, really, over the years. And by the time I worked there, it was the late 90s. And by that time, the hospital was purely for the elderly. There were some wards for people with organic problems like dementia, and some wards for functional illness, so elderly people with depression or schizophrenia, even drug problems, you know, there was all kinds of things. And I worked on one of the functional wards, and I also lived in the nurses' home next door to it for a few years as well, which was also a very spooky building. I can't even begin to explain, to be honest, how spooky this hospital was. The corridors seemed to go on forever, and they were often dim, and a lot of the hospital was under the ground. You know, all the kitchens were under the ground. You know, there was a massive basement, and there was a mortuary in the grounds, which I would have to visit on occasion. And you know, I'd trained around that hospital, and I'd been told all the stories from all the staff about things they'd seen and felt, and that there was always weird things like doors opening and shutting, cupboard doors opening and shutting, furniture moving, things being moved around a lot, people seeing apparitions, people seeing all sorts of things really. And myself and one of my colleagues, we were completely fascinated with this. You know, we were really into our psychic abilities, and you know, we read tarot cards, and you know, we were just fascinated with this kind of thing really. And so on a night shift one day, we decided and this is naughty, I mean, this is really naughty, because we were on duty and we shouldn't have been doing such things. But, you know, we'd got everyone to bed and the ward was quiet, and we went down to the empty ward at the end of the corridor, because at that time we had a ward that was for sort of respite beds, I suppose, and at the time it was empty. So we went down to this room with a pendulum, and from this room we sat at the end bed, and you could see all the way down the ward, which was quite long, and into the corridor. And we sat there because we had a good view of the corridor and we could see all the patients' doors. So we would have known if somebody had got out of bed or anybody needed us, you know, we would have known. So we sat where we could see everything really. And we sat in this room for quite a while, and we did a little meditation, we did a little blessing, and then we got the pendulum out and we sat there, and you know, we took turns with the pendulum. And to start off with, it really wasn't doing very much. You know, we were just asking, is there anybody here? Does anybody want to talk to us? Would anybody show us a sign that they were there? And we were kind of just sort of thinking, oh, you know, we'll give up, we'll have a go another day. And all of a sudden, the pendulum started to swing wildly, and my colleague was holding it, and I was giggling a bit, I think, at that time, because I get very easily spooked, and you know, it was we didn't have any lights on in the room. All we had was the light from the corridor and the light coming in through the big windows from the moon. And so, you know, I was spooked, and I think I'd had enough, really. I was ready to get back out into the light. And but the pendulum started to swing really quite wildly, and we both just sat there with like eyes like wide, looking at each other, and I was like, are you doing that? And she was like, no. It's not me. And so we asked again, is there anybody here? Does anybody want to speak to us? And I am not kidding. I'm honestly not kidding. But as we said those words, we were aware of a noise right down the end of the corridor. So we looked down the ward and all the way down the corridor, and all of a sudden the big heavy fire doors that are kept open by, I don't know, electricity, magnets, I don't know how they keep them open, but they're safety big fire doors, and they only close if there's a fire or a problem with the electricity, I guess. And all of a sudden the doors right at the end of the corridor swung shut, and both of us jumped out of our skin. And as they slammed shut, the lights, and there must have been 5 or 6 of the lights in the ceiling coming down the corridor, every single one of those lights, one after the other, blinked out. And so the corridor was getting darker and darker until it got to the entrance of the ward we were sat in, and the fire doors there also clicked and swung shut, shutting us in that ward. And me and my colleague, I think, again, were completely frozen. I don't think I even had any thoughts of running at that point. I was just like, I think both of us had our mouths open and our eyes as wide as our mouths, and we were just like looking at each other, looking at the corridor, looking at each other, looking at the corridor. And we were both just like, I don't think we said anything. I think we were frozen, absolutely frozen in terror. And all of a sudden, it was like the spell broke, and both of us stood up and went to walk towards the doors. And as we did, the doors clicked open. They swung open. All the lights gradually, one by one, went back on in the corridor, and the doors at the end of the corridor opened as well and clicked back into place. And we we crept out of this ward into the corridor and just sort of were like stood there like this looking around, and I touched the doors and both of us were like looking at each other, and we slowly walked down the corridor back to the nurse's office and just sat there. And both of us just sat there like looking at each other and getting up every few seconds and looking out into the corridor, and then we sat down again. And it took us maybe an hour or so to like even be in a position to even speak to each other. And we, you know, like you do, we were just like, well, was there a mini sort of little power cut? You know, what happened? But we'd asked, you know, later on and through the night, we'd asked the duty manager that came round, you know, had there been a power cut? No, there'd not been any power cuts. And so all the time we were just looking at each other with these big wide eyes, and we didn't really ever try again because it felt very much like it was not a friendly presence, whatever it was. It was like we'd asked, is anybody there? Does anyone want to talk to us? And it was like those doors slammed into place as if to say no. And it almost felt like we were being trapped there. I don't know. It was a very, very weird thing, and it was not comfortable at all. And I was never comfortable on that ward after that. You know, I worked nights occasionally, and you know, during the night you could go and have a lay down on your break and have a little doze, and not a chance could I sleep on that ward. Not a chance. I was very cautious after that about where I went on my own, and you know, it was terrifying. And anyway, I'm gonna see if I can insert some photos right at the end of this, and I'm taking those photos from a video that was done in the last week or so by a brilliant channel called Haunted and Abandoned Norfolk. And I didn't realise, because I live maybe 20 miles away from that hospital now, I didn't realise only a week or two ago there was a massive fire on the grounds there, and all the roof and all the insides of this hospital burnt down. I mean, it was shut. The hospital was shut, I think, at the end of the 90s, not long after I stopped working there. It was closed down, and I think part of it was turned into housing. Care in the community came in, and people were shipped out of the big mental hospitals, the asylums, into the community. I know in America you had a similar thing happen with care in the community, and it was a cost-cutting exercise, wasn't it? It saved a lot of money for the government, but was not really the thing for the patients. Many of them died after being shipped out into the community because all they'd ever known was these hospitals. You know, some people had lived there for 70, 80 years. And like I said, a week or two ago, there was a massive fire there, and it makes you wonder what will be done with the land now there's been a fire. You know, will it be redeveloped for more housing? Hey, I don't know. That's my cynical mind, isn't it? But I'll see if I can insert those photos right at the end of this. But don't hold your horses, because I'm not very good at editing and it may not happen. But I'm just looking at my notes. Yeah, that's nothing else. That's my 5 little stories. I think I've probably got a few more that I could come up with another time. But I think this is a really good idea, good sort of time of the year to tell your spooky tales. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed that. Do say hello, and you know, if maybe you've got a few stories of your own, why not do your own video? I would love to hear. So Thanks for watching, and I shall see you all later.